On behalf of your host, Steve D, this is Bruce Buffer saying thank you for tuning in to XtremeLyfe. And now, this is the moment XtremeLyfe fans around the world have been waiting for. It's time!
Getting set up. But yeah, I've been, this was actually, I had this studio when I first started this podcast. I had this studio in my dining room, which eventually, my wife was fine with, but I know it was one of those things where it's like, get all this crap out of my dining room, please.
Yeah, exactly.
So I finally had to I converted one of the rooms in the house into, that we weren't using, luckily into the studio. And now it's actually a lot better because I turned it into my little cave here, and I could, and I don't have the dogs jumping on me. I could shut them out. All kinds of, getting a little bit better, everything, every show and every experience is a little bit better, man. But thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate it, man. Definitely an honor having you on. I mean, I'm going to embarrass you a little bit. You're a professor you're a professor with the Department of Sports Science. And just correct me if I'm wrong on any of this. I'm just pulling, from data I got here. 20 years of experience working with boxers and MMA athletes.
Yeah, at least that now. Yep.
Yeah, it's amazing. And you're a former Olympic lifting competitor, correct?
Yeah, did some Olympic lifting, and very low level competition. That goes way back, but I tried that a little bit. So we did a little of that too.
Yeah, and so I you know what, man? I love, a lot of times when I have guests on, I just had Ken Shamrock on. I read his all day.
Oh, cool.
I love getting the reactions when I read some of this stuff off of people. You're a black belt in multiple disciplines. What do you got black belts in?
So it's Japanese, not BJJ. I'm training that now, okay. But I've been training that for years, and judo and Japanese jiu-jitsu.
Okay, yeah. You working with Matt on that? You working with Matt?
No, actually, I need to get over there more. I've been in Brooklyn a lot. I train in Brooklyn because it's right near where I teach. Yeah. But I need to get on the finer points of jiu-jitsu with Mr. Serra and his team. They're incredible.
Yeah, they're amazing. He's got some amazing competitors coming out of there. And same thing, you work with Law MMA. They're another, Ray Longo, amazing striking coach. So there's a lot of, cool stuff going on there.
Without question, Steve. And what's really fascinating about that team, and Ray and Matt have done a wonderful job in building. And I know this is cliche, but first of all, it's a small school, right? Like there's not a lot of people coming, and they're all local with a handful of people like Marab coming from Georgia, of course, and which is wonderful. But look at this, very potentially 3 belts out of that. Sarah Weidman, and if Aljo can beat Jan, look, that's impressive, right? I mean,
I'm betting on Aljo on this one.
Yeah,
me too. I saw him the other day. He looks damn good.
He does.
He was, I just don't know. I don't know that how he. I don't want to jinx it because I'm very, very superstitious like that. But I just think he's definitely got what it takes and probably deserves it. Definitely deserves it.
Yeah.
Because he's been out there rocking for a while now, and
yeah, you're right.
And definitely deserves that shot, and definitely deserves to win that belt. But like I said, he looked phenomenal the other day. So I think he's going to do a great job. So you also have a double master's, right? You have a master's in exercise physiology and human nutrition. And a doctorate. Yeah. Right. And
a doctorate is in performance and sports psychology. And under that, my research fascination with that is kind of what we call, like psychomotor learning. How do we learn? How do we process? How do we see images and things before we do them? It's really cool stuff. I really love all that.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It's fascinating. Obviously, you know what the hell you're talking about. I'm just going to say that straight up. I mean, you're a consultant with some Fortune 500 companies, including Pfizer, on their wellness programs for their internal, for their, their staff and the people that work there, their executives and whatnot, to keep them.
That's correct. Yeah. For 13 years, I was with them. It was wonderful. So we did a lot of internal wellness, nutrition, and the goal there was to deliver health and wellness services to the employees. And they were really on the cutting edge of that. It really, really great.
And that's phenomenal because, you know, I mean, that's one thing. We know there's a huge link between physical wellness and mental wellness. And, you know, they're all linked together. You know, I think, you know, my philosophy has always been there's three things you really got to work on, right? Physical wellness, psychological wellness, and spiritual wellness.
Amen. Yeah.
All three of
right there.
All three
right?
of them. That's it. It's really that simple, but it's not, because it gets really complicated from there. So.
No, well, yeah. In statement, it's quite simple, right, Steve?
Yeah.
But the application. But to your point, you're right on, and I think what's really important is to have that balance, because if you're not doing the physical, then you need more attention to the mental and spiritual. If you're not spiritual, then you better have more on the mental and the physical, because you have to compensate in other areas. So I think that balance is perfectly stated by you, and all need attention.
Yeah, no, and you have to work them all. You know, I mean, you could be, you know, you could be very physically fit, but mentally not okay. And then you
right.
Work everything. I mean, it's really, a fighter could even tell you that. Like when you look at fighters, I mean, sometimes the fight comes down to not just who's better physically fit for that event, but who's mentally prepared, right? Who's in that spot where they're more mentally prepared, you know?
Yeah. No, and I think you're right on, and that is the reason why later in life I started to go more towards psychology and performance psychology, because I would watch athletes that for years, Steve, we would train, and by every measurable marker, if you look at it in camp, literally every marker, like testing, like power output with machinery, sophisticated stuff, performance of skill acquisition by way of the coach. In better words, you see a 10 to 12 week camp go beautifully. Absolutely beautifully. And then 30 seconds into the fight, people are texting me, well, how come this person didn't train hard? And, you know, and they did everything wonderful. And what was it? It was maybe the first time that it was the big stage. And this is normal. This is not condemning anyone. Yeah. But the anxiety and the tension breaks that mental focus and burns all the energy prior to the competition. And it creates muscle tightness and stiffness and an actual loss of attention. So to your point, it really, the mental side has to be there. You know, you can't, the brain controls everything. In the end, it runs everything, right?
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And that's, you know, and I would just say that's wonderfully stated by you. It's, and what you're kind of exampling here is what we see in, like, you think of, let's think of like the executive, right? The person working in the office every day, high pressure, working very hard, 12 hours a day to, you know, 12 to 16 hours a day to get stuff done. Fighters go through the same thing. Athletes go through the same thing, just a different type. It's burnout, right? You burn out. You train so hard and so focused throughout the camp that you get to the event, and maybe there's a lot going on. Maybe it is that, you know, like you said, the big stage jitters, things like that that get to you. But you know, you can, from training to that, you know, twice a day, whatever it is, if you're doing 2 a days, because a lot of times at a high level athlete, you're doing 2 a days, an AM and a PM.
Definitely.
And then, you know, you just get to a point where you fry yourself, you know, especially doing that for years on end too. I mean, you got to remember, a lot of these guys have been doing that a long time.
Well, you're absolutely, you're completely right. And then what happens there, to your statement earlier, is sometimes there's a disproportionate balance between the mental, the spiritual, and the physical because of the demands in one aspect of it, right? Yeah. So the physical demands of 2 or 3 training sessions a day over 10 weeks take a toll on the mental, and maybe there's a loss of time in the spiritual. Or for that executive, to your point, well stated, and you're right, these are 14, 16-hour days.
Yep.
And where's the physical balance? Where's the fitness balance? Where's the time for the spiritual balance? So unequivocally, if it's not there, inevitably, you will lead to some form of, whether you could call it, as you stated, a burnout, or what's happening is imbalance, and then it's impeding the other area in your life. And that brain is like a muscle. You don't do bench press every day. Why? Because that particular muscle group and the associated fibers that you train need a rest. Well, if you're incessantly just using the same mental processing day in and day out, such as in the camp, and you have no spiritual break, no mental break, you're fatigued. It's almost as if you're fatiguing or depleting those neural pathways too.
Oh, absolutely.
So you need that eclectic approach that you're talking about. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I'm a huge fan of breaking things up. I'm a big fan of keeping things different. Don't train the same way all the time. Train, keep the, my background with CrossFit, things like that.
Yeah. Well, you guys know how to do that. You do it well.
I mean, sometimes overly, I think, but it's definitely, like that's why I commend a lot of these Fortune 500 companies and companies like, just major companies that are focusing on wellness too. They want to make sure people are well because they realize one thing. Number one, the company is they want all their people to be healthy. Nobody wants to have people not well.
Absolutely.
But they also, that productivity increases when you have well people in every aspect.
It does. And from a dietary perspective, physical activity. So one thing Pfizer realized too, as an example of a Fortune 5, is the importance of physical activity. And I talk about this with my students a lot. You cannot separate optimal cognition from moving. Mm-hmm. You just can't. Yeah. Our ancestors only learned, not only, let me not use that word, but largely learned when they were moving, okay? There was no written word for the vast majority of human existence. You didn't order in food. You didn't have a house and air conditioning. So the point to all that is,
you just ruined the Stone Age for me, by the way. I'm just telling you, just ruined it.
Well, not as romantic as everyone makes it out to be honest with you. It's not nearly as great. But my point to that is, you had to hunt, you had to build, you had to evade warring tribes, you had to try to plant, you had to try to make predictions of the weather, and most of this involved you moving. Mm-hmm. The human brain performs optimally in concert with movement, and that's how you get neurogenesis, new brain cells, optimal cognition, and you marry those things together, physical activity with advancing one's brain through learning new skills, and that's a completer picture. I wish the rules were different, but they are not. If someone is sedentary and they're brilliant, I will contend they would be more brilliant if they moved and trained.
Oh, absolutely. Right? And movement relieves stress. We know that too, right?
Unequivocally.
Movement relieves stress. So, I say this all the time because I don't know if you know much about I have a master's in social work from the University.
You told me that's fantastic.
Yes, I've been been around this for a while, and one thing that I do know is stress can severely impede performance. We are also the only humans are, I believe, and I hate using the term like you do, only right? I'm going to say that a little bit here. I think humans are the only animal out there that are able to maintain stress for long periods of time. Most animals don't do that. You think about what happens in the animal kingdom, right? They, let's say a lion's chasing a gazelle. The stress hormones kick in, the fight, flight, freeze kicks in. They're moving. They within 30 seconds to 2 minutes, they're either going to be out of danger and unstressed, or they are going to be dead. And that's kind of what you're talking about with the hunter-gatherer mentality, from what we come from.
Yep. The anxiety of the unknown that gazelle only has for the time it's being chased, right? Yep. It's not worried about the weather, paying bills, its bank account. So, yeah, you're absolutely right.
Or half the silly shit we worry about.
They could go. Even worse, the stuff we create that is silly. You got that right. Absolutely. Better point.
That's ourselves out,
Yep.
I get that fight, flight. I don't know about you, but I get that fight, flight, freeze response when I go to tap for my phone and it's not in my pocket. I'm like, for about a second, my whole body goes into a fight, flight, freeze mode.
I can see that too. You get that lump in your throat. Uh-oh, half my life is gone. Absolutely, on a phone, no doubt.
But interestingly, like I said, they get away and they're unstressed. Cortisol kicks in, and they basically come down. Whereas, we could stay stressed for days. I mean, we could literally.
You're totally right. Right? It's It's not the extreme fight or flight mechanism, right? So like your epinephrine, norepinephrine, those are peptide hormones.
Yep.
They're part of the fight or flight. They don't have a really long half-life, and most peptide protein hormones don't, but they'll still kick in. But to your point, and people, you know, Steve, I think one thing people really do is they give cortisol a bad rap. It's a wonderful hormone. It's not a wonderful hormone when it's chronically elevated, right?
Yep.
So what we have in our stress mechanism, to your point, and that you well understand, is it's not as extreme as fight or flight, but it's a chronic elevation of the cortisol and the stress response. And that is really highly damaging to the newer centers of the brain, hippocampus, prefrontal cortex, all that. It builds the amygdala, which is the stress response, and it does a lot of harm to the body, to your point.
Yeah.
So mediating that stress, it sounds cliche and everybody says do it, but finding ways is extremely important to do it.
Yeah, and that's why we look at, you know, that we keep coming back to that three things that we talked about earlier, the mental, physical, and spiritual, because they're all part of that, right? So, you know, it's definitely, and you know, I mean, it's just so important to understand that, whether you're, you know, somebody who's just exercising for regular fitness, somebody who's just, who is exercising for elite performance, right? There are two different things here now, and I want to go into that a little bit, if you don't mind.
Sure. Love to.
The difference between, you know, let's say just regular like somebody who just said, I want to lose a few pounds, I want to get in shape, and I want to feel good, I want to look good with a bathing suit on in the summertime, and somebody who is training, let's say, for a fight, or somebody who's training for a competitive event of some kind. So there's two different things here. Now, I know some of that may be a little different, right? Whether sport-specific training is a little bit different, but what's on a very high level, I guess, what's the difference between training for fitness and training for competition?
Yeah, well, I think there's wonderful news in all this, and I share it with my students, right? Because if you're talking in terms of health in fitness, and I know a lot of us who are really into intense exercises may not appreciate this, but the intensities need not be that high. I mean, some of the healthiest people we know, Steve, live in a blue zone, and they're physically active. They eat healthy food, and they garden, and they move. Most of my family, you know, wanted to die at 90 and live to 100. And all they ever did was walk and be active. So to your point on the fitness and health, the beautiful thing is activity of daily living counts, moving, constantly doing things. Some people mock walking up the stairs, but over a year, constantly doing that happens. So integrating volitional activity, physical activity that you really enjoy, that need not be super intense, reasonable dietary habits, walking everywhere and anywhere you can is going to keep you healthy. It really is. And even low intensities, like there's a wonderful paper I share with my students by the American College of Sports Medicine. And it's just, I get so excited about this. Think about this. You could have advanced type 2 diabetes. You take the advanced type 2 diabetic, 130-minute walk, and for 24 to 48 hours, their insulin sensitivity has been improved from one good brisk walk, and you're already reversing that disease. Now, you got to do it 3 times a week, 4 times a week, but that's my point about health. It's not, and fitness is not requiring the demands that you see on Instagram, which in my opinion then makes the general population become intimidated from ever starting, because that's what they think is necessary for guys like you and I who love the extreme and the crazy. You know?
Yeah, I mean, that's what attracted me, but that doesn't attract everybody, right? That's it doesn't get everybody. I'm like all about, you know, I want to be laying on the ground at the end of a workout, hard to breathe, you know, that kind of stuff. But that's not for everybody. I mean, one of the things that's hardest for me to hear sometimes from some people who want to start exercising is, you know, I'll say, hey, why don't you try and find a CrossFit near you and just get started? And they always tell me, a lot of people tell me the same thing. I got to get in shape before I start doing CrossFit. I said, well, I mean, you got to be in shape before you start competing in CrossFit.
Right, correct.
You don't have to be in shape before you start. And that might not even be 100% true. But, you know, you got to, you know, just start. Get there somewhere. You don't have to be.
Well, you're absolutely right. And in that, but that brings into coaching. So, for example, if you were taking on, let's just say hypothetically, some private clients with your advanced level at CrossFit and your success in competition, and your knowledge of this training practice, you know that you could welcome someone in and know how to do it and make them enjoy it, right? So I think that they may be intimidated, but if they like Steve and they know Steve, they're going to give it a shot. And if he introduces it to them properly, then we may have a buyer, right? Absolutely. So I think that I think it's really important too, someone's first experience with anything. And I like the concept of saying, you know what, I should probably be in a little bit of better shape before I start something as advanced as CrossFit. But to reiterate, I also think we push a lot of people away in the beginning, depending upon the coaching style. So someone like you could bring a beginner in and probably make them fall in love with it and keep them for a long period of time, you know? So
yeah, I always say this. I could exhaust someone to death with a PVC pipe. You don't need to be holding a ton of weight. I can make you very tired with a PVC pipe and a band. That's it. I mean, that's all we need. We will wear you out. You will feel like you got to work out. And, you know, I mean, and that's the thing. And I think that's one thing people want too. And that's one of the other kind of points here is there, you know, you don't have to walk away from every workout completely drained. Right?
Absolutely.
And matter of fact, that's against what you're actually trying to do.
I think you're right on, and no one does that, by the way.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, pro football players have an off season and they do something else. Okay, I mean the workouts that matter are not the good ones. They're the ones you did in between that build a bridge to the good ones. Yep. A lot of times people, you know, the people will say, oh, you know, I'm not motivated today. Good. No human is motivated every day. What you do today, even if it's a lower intensity, is connecting the higher intensities and the successful workouts. So to your point, they're not all going to be that way. They can't all be that way. And that's all right. You know, it's consistency. In training and nutrition, you know this better than I. You don't win by knockout. You jab and you fight 12 rounds and you wear it down, right?
Yep. Well, that's one of the things I'll tell you. I'm working with Jenny Nadell on my striking, and that's what I think she yelled at me. She's like, "You always going for the even my jabs." She's like, "Just use your jabs to set up the next thing."
Exactly.
You're not killing somebody with your jab. You're not going to knock them out with your jab.
And you don't have to put a hole in the Hoover Dam with your jab.
Exactly.
You can actually just stick it out there, right? But no, yeah, that's right. But that's a good analogy because some workouts could be like that.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And they don't all have to be that way. And sometimes I think, too, the other thing that may, and looking from a neuroscience perspective, guys like you and I and many of the people that listen and that we meet and chat with together, like we train and we feel really great after. I'm not sure that mechanism is as prominent in everyone. So my point to this is I've gone to the Brooklyn Museum of Art with my buddy. He can sit there and stare at one painting for 9 hours. And the reward he receives from that is something that I just don't get. I'm not designed for it. I'll walk in and go, this guy's good. That guy's on acid. That's horrible. Let's get at it.
He's on acid. That's great.
In 5 minutes, I covered the whole museum. But my point to that is maybe some people just don't get as high or as we would, and they don't love it as much, and I think that's okay. The question is, how do we bring them in and find things that they enjoy the most to keep them active, to improve their health? And that's the mission, too, as we see just I don't want to, cut you off here, but during the whole COVID, the hurtful part is we're losing a lot of people due to their health more than the virus itself. And that's why this is so important, beyond anything else, right? I mean, health is what's being healthy. There are rare exceptions, but being healthy is the number one therapeutic to this condition.
Oh, absolutely. And nobody's talking about it. That's the problem. That's
not enough.
Crazy that we're hearing about wear your mask, wash your hands,
right?
Wipe down every surface known to man that you could think of. We're hearing all this stuff, but, not necessarily bad. I try to limit myself a little bit on the hand sanitizer because I believe that in the long run, that's going to end up weakening my immune system.
Very well, man.
If I use that in the long run, right? Overly. I think overly cleaning everything is not going to be beneficial to us at all.
Right.
However, nobody's talking about vitamins. Nobody's talking about, eating healthy and eating right. Nobody's talking about vitamin D actually has been shown that people who
Absolutely.
People who have COVID do better if they have a high vitamin C or vitamin D.
Vitamin D.
level. Yeah.
Totally. Yep. So get out, get a walk, even in the winter months, get the sun on there. No doubt. And there's a tendency, if guys like you and I are not careful, to think people are talking about it because I'm talking about good nutrition and fitness because we're always around it.
Yep.
But if you go to the more general information about it, people are, they compare us to Japan that has an obesity rate of 4%. We are at approximately nearly 40. Sweden's in the single digits. So the nations that have had success, it's not just due to their practices, whether they're shutting down, it's due to their health.
Their lifestyle. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that is why this is so important. And I'm hoping after it subsides that we can put a great emphasis on getting people just to consider this more.
Yeah, no, you're right. And I wish people would. I mean, that's the thing. Exercise, do things to boost your immune system normally and naturally. If you could do that, even if you if you happen to get this, you will probably do better.
Exactly.
And you'll have, it's like putting your armor on, right?
Right.
Around, a face mask is good to a certain point, but
there you go. Right. If you put the armor on and you're weak and fragile under the armor collapses.
Exactly.
So,
eventually, it's going to fall apart, right? So, yes, do all the things they're telling you to do, but also, make sure you're taking care of yourself in another smart way, which is getting proper diet, getting proper sleep. People never talk about sleep either. Get enough sleep. It's hard to do sometimes. I get it, believe me. But, all these things and get all that stuff, eat right, vitamins, vitamin D, 5,000 IUs a day if you can get it in. Definitely a good, these are all things that are shown to help.
Right. And what's wonderful? They don't cost a dime.
No.
Yeah. Okay, so you spend a little on the vitamin D. Let me take that back, right?
Yeah, but that's not much. That's cheap.
But all of it, all of it's readily available.
At least until everybody starts buying it, then it'll go up.
Well, great point, because I foresee that being wiped out soon.
Yeah. Be like, anything goes on now, it's going to be vitamin D and toilet paper.
Maybe they're going to, they'll sell vitamin D with toilet paper in the same package. How about that?
But yeah, man, and you and I both know, fitness is an important thing, and it's not just physical, but it's a big part of what we, you and I both talk about a lot is the physical side of it. That being said, I hear you in what you said before. We were talking about how exercise doesn't have to drain you every single time. I did a Russian program a while back, a Russian strength program. It was about a 9-week program. I can't for the life of me remember the name of it, but it was a program designed basically for their Olympic powerlifting team. And basically it was at 80, you stayed at 80% almost the whole time. You never shifted weight. And for me, as an American, person who's been into fitness for a long time, I'm used to progressive overload, right? That's always
right.
Progressive overload. So you wear yourself down pretty good. But I was amazed by the fact that, there were times I'd go in 6 reps of 2. That's what it would be. 6 reps of 2 and it wasn't my whole program, but that was the strength part of my program. 6 reps of 2, maybe deadlift or bench press or whatever I was doing, or strict press. And then I would come out of it and I would feel like, oh, wow, I'd feel like I didn't even got anything. Well, let me tell you something. At the end of those 9 weeks, I was doing, at 80%, because it would go, I think 1 week was six reps of 2 or 6 sets of 2, then it was 6 sets of 6, then it was 6 sets of 2, and it would always stay at the same weight though, just varied the rep scheme a little bit.
Interesting. So they undulated the rep.
Yep.
And the volume, but not the load. Well, that would be, load is part of the volume, but the load was standard, but the reps changed then, right?
Much, yeah, and almost through the whole thing. Now, in the last couple of weeks, the load changed a little bit, right? So by the end of it, you know, in the last, the 9th week when you're testing, you're actually doing the 6 sets of 2 at like, what was it, like 85% or 90%, which then put you at, when you did your max again, you would end up being at 105%. Of what your previous max was, right?
Yeah.
Very similar to kind of like the Wendler thinking, I think, except
yeah,
Wendler,
yeah,
Wendler had a little,
right.
Wendler
So that's fascinating. So you, in most cases, you're not even at max effort, but making that stimulus is sufficient. Yeah, that stimulus is sufficient to make the progress that you want. Yeah.
No, and it amazed me because I'm always, you know, coming from where I come from, it's like, you know, I'm CrossFit and progressive overload type training and that kind of thing. This whole thing, when I first read it, didn't even make sense to me. And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to try it. I'm going to try it. And you know what? It worked. They know something.
Good. Yep. And to your point earlier, you said this, we need to move it around. There's an old saying in sports science, right? Everything works. Nothing works for long. Okay.
Yes. Yeah. You get used to it.
Right. So such as life, by the way, everything works and doesn't always work for long. But certainly we do see that in training. And you know, once that stimulus is leading to some leveling off or plateauing, then there's a host of great changes we could make to continue to advance performance, you know?
Oh yeah, always vary it up. I mean, that's the thing.
Yep.
At the very, I mean, there's times I'll go through 6 weeks of pretty similar stuff. Now I may bench press, like I may have, like right now I have a bench press part of my workout right now, which, you know, I don't do that often. As a CrossFitter, we don't bench press that much. But the way I'm doing it is I'm bench pressing on a bench like once a week. But then the other 2 days that I'm bench pressing, I'm benching with kettlebells or single arm dumbbells, or, you know, it's always a variation. So your muscles never kind of get, you know, because your muscles will trick you, you know, after a while.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Used to it.
No, that's smart too. Yeah. You know, there was a guy one time named Mike Mensa many years back. And he had a funny line, and it's to your point. He said, you want to have a good bench press? Stay away from it. And I think what he meant is what you're doing. Supplemental, ancillary movements, assistance exercises, other things that also, it isn't just the bench that prepares you for the bench, but a host of other movements that are supplemental to it that augment it. So that is why that variety is so valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. So, you know, and one thing, you know, you and I kind of touched on, how important is nutrition because you're training a lot of fighters right now. Are you training nutrition with them as well? And you got a lot of guys coming up and a lot of guys with a lot of heavy competition coming up in the near future. What does that training look like with, I mean, don't give me the exact thing because I don't want anybody to know what's going on, but, and I know you wouldn't.
You know what? I'm always happy to share, but to your point, Steve, here's what I say to my students and, you know, okay, so a lot of times, though, let me start it off with this. You like to get a lot of pro athletes that like to screw with people. Oh, all I eat is McDonald's. And I think Floyd would say that. And maybe he
that ain't true.
Maybe he did, but it's probably not, right? And Michael Phelps would say, I'll eat, you know, whatever, 20,000 calories a day. And that's okay. That doesn't mean everything he ate was junk. It also meant that he probably ate good food. My point to this is how I view it. Other than oxygen, okay, everything you need comes from food. You don't breathe in potassium, calcium, magnesium, sodium. You don't breathe in vitamin A. Okay, we can get some D from the sun. You and I discussed it, but not C, not E, right? These are, you make yourself anew and you advance yourself through biochemical processes. These biochemical processes rely on nutrients. So if you break it to that micro level, nutrition is that important. And I don't care how good of an athlete someone is. If they ate well, they would be even better. And the 3 best basketball players in my lifetime, and I don't know basketball at all, but I do consult people that do. But it's Jordan, of course, in my lifetime, Kobe, and LeBron. And all 3 of them had a personal chef. Yeah. Okay, they see the value in it. They see the value in creating a biochemically favorable environment so that you can augment your performance. And maybe, unfortunately, sometimes with nutrition, Steve, you don't see the results immediately. It's not like caffeine, okay? You can take some in and you feel it, right? With food, it's the aggregate effect where the improvements are there. Personally, I think it's vital. No matter how good you perform, you'll always be better by eating well. And in terms of weight class sports, by neglecting the nutrition, inevitably you're making the cut harder and mitigating your performance as a result of that.
Yeah, and that's and for a fighter too, it's that cut that's so important, because you got to make the
Absolutely.
cut to get to the to make the weight so you could fight that day, right? So and it's interesting, and a lot of people are talking also about when you're making that cut, the hydration is an issue. Vital, and an issue often in that. I mean, so going into that nutrition, because I know a big thing in CrossFit for a while was paleo.
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts on paleo versus, let's say, intermittent fasting versus, let's say, the RP diet? I mean, there's a million different.
There is, right?
Literally, if you put in diet on the internet right now or nutrition, you're going to pull up about 1 billion different programs.
Might be Google's #1 search. You're right.
And it's not always good. They're not all equal. I would say they're not all equul. There's some very, very good ones. I think there's a few really, really good ones, and there's a lot of ones that might not be so good, right? So
right, definitely. Well, good. I mean, I'll cover two, right? First of all, I think, and I know paleo is very good and high in CrossFit, and basically the premise behind it is almost how I eat anyway. Mm-hmm. So I don't have anything against it. Like, okay, so if you want to add some grains, right, if you want to go post-agricultural, all right. So I know paleo will stick to the berries and some of the root vegetables and the lean protein.
Yep.
Yeah. And personally, I like that approach. It works well for me. Mm-hmm. Okay, that is a feasible and tangible approach. If people want to go vegan, because I say this to my students, if they want to go vegan for ethical reasons, religious observance, I get that. I fully support it. But I don't think that you can isolate any one way humans are meant to eat, because inherent in that is you're assuming first there were no seasons and the food was the same year round. And you're also assuming that everybody lived in the same part of the world. Mm. So 10,000 years ago, living in Hawaii is not the same as living in Siberia. So I do think we have an omnivoric nature in that we can do quite well with a large variety of foods. So generally speaking, I like the paleo approach, but me personally, I'll add some grains, some rice and stuff like that.
Yeah, yeah.
Regarding the intermittent fasting, as an example, I had a good conversation with Stephen Lee. He helps run Law MMA the other day, and my position on it is it's really fine, but the days that you need a lot of cognitive processing, nutrition to me is not just about the periphery. It's not about just putting glycogen in the muscle, sodium, potassium balance for water distribution, having the glucose and fats to burn. It's about cognitive performance. Mm-hmm. And people will tell you that their mind is very clear sometimes on intermittent fasting or sustained periods without food. And you're probably having the brain burn glucose at a slower pace, or maybe even, depending on how long you fast, working into ketone bodies in the brain. But my point is this: if you have a day where your processing, if you're an athlete, needs not be as high, maybe you're a jiu-jitsu instructor and you're teaching a beginner and you want to finish eating at 8 p.m. and fast until 1 p.m., but you're teaching in the morning, if the cognitive demands are not that high, it may be fine. But I don't see the purpose in intermittent fasting when you're sparring and you're trying to learn new motor skills and new neuromotor patterns, and then you have to process at rapid speeds because somebody's throwing a punch at you, trying to take you down, and you have to counter that. Under those circumstances, I'm not a huge proponent. I would prefer somebody eat some carbohydrate pre-training when the cognitive demands are high. But outside of that, I do think there's a place for IM and the intermittent fasting, but not that many fighters. I don't know if they've done it historically that long. Most of them are claiming they're doing it when they're not training afterwards,
Yeah, they'll do it when they're off season, don't have a fight coming, not in camp.
And that's wonderful.
Yeah,
That's
something like just to keep in a good fit condition, and you brought up carbs too, which is another big, this is another field that I'm very interested in, is how to use carbs, right? Because carbs are important, right?
Yes, they are.
Paleo is kind of like that they have that moderate, amount of protein, high fat content, good fats, healthy fats, and very low carbs, right? Most of the time. RP, Renaissance periodization, is kind of very similar to that, where you're scaling everything, counting the carbs. You have like something you're allowed to have at certain, and it's basically timing.
Yeah, they do very intricate work, RP, and nice work. Yeah.
Oh yeah, they do a great job. And then you have some old school stuff where we talk about carbs preload and carbs backload, right? So and I've always kind of struggled with this. Is it better for me to eat a lot of carbs before, or is it better for me to backload in the carbs later? And then, and I've tried to figure it out, man. Believe me, I've tried. I've experimented with this with my performance, and I still have kind of like the jury's still out for me. I'm 48 years old, and the jury is still out. I can't figure it out what's better, because I've performed both, and I'm not sure, if it's affected me all that much on either side of that. But what are your thoughts on that?
Well, that's a great question, and I think that what I try to do when I'm working with an athlete is get an estimate on how many carbohydrate grams we think they may need during the day. An estimate, right? I mean, so, maybe their body could hold approximately 500 grams of carbohydrates in skeletal muscle, maybe 100 grams in the liver. Okay, that's your storage depot. But then what do? You take a look at what their so here's what I'll do. Like, carbs are needed. Lean body mass, try to get a good basal metabolic rate on them. Then try to look at their activity of daily living or their total caloric expenditure from fighting. And then what I'll do is say, hey, let's get in just a hypothetical, 500 grams of carbs for all of this. And then let's try to break it down to a larger carb meal, maybe earlier, training, a larger carb meal down the road, and smaller ones in and around it. But my point to this is carbohydrates in sport performance are important. It's kind of like what people would ask me about the keto diet. Can you be a pure ketogenic? I mean, like 80% fat, 15% protein, 5% carb. Yeah. Real fat keto, right?
Basically put yourself into starvation for the moment.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And they would say to me, Tony, can you be an MMA fighter and do keto? And I would always say, kind of what I would say. I would say, well, yeah, you can run a Formula One car on regular Hess unleaded, but I don't think it's a good idea after spending $20 million on the car.
Get used to get punched in the face a lot.
Exactly. The point to it is, don't tempt your physiology. Tempting physiology is and you do a lot of work with these great men and great women of the armed forces. They have to tempt physiology. They have to go on a mission, a Navy SEAL, maybe for 24 hours with low food, and overcome the cognitive stresses. They have to. That's their job. But if you're a fighter and you're fighting for money, and the difference is a title fight, and if you lose it, now you're fighting for 150 instead of 600,000 in your title fights, don't play. Get the carbs in, because they are a primary fuel. Not the only, but a primary in performance and fight performance. We try to figure out the total amount. And then, to your point, we work on where the distribution is optimal. Some people will do better backloading. Some will do better front loading, and it also depends upon the time of day and your training volume. But the whole point is, they're an important fuel in the brain. They're an important fuel in the body. And if you're going to deplete those fuels, you're not going to learn as effectively, and you're not going to learn as long. If you do both of those, you're handicapping your skill acquisition.
That's amazing. Yeah, no, you broke it down perfectly. And that's the one thing I think we really have to understand too. And you took it to a spot where I always like to go to, is individuality. Yes. A lot of times, when you hear a lot of this stuff, or you see things on the internet and they put these things out there, and there's different kind of research going on. The other piece you got to remember is everybody's physiology is a bit different.
It is. You're right on.
Everybody.
Right.
not everybody's going to process everything the same way. You know?
They are not. And to your point, some people have lactose intolerance.
Yep.
That's a obvious one. Some people have a peanut allergy.
Yep.
Some people lack ADH, which is alcohol dehydrogenase. So if they drink, they get like almost a permanent hangover, right? Because
yeah.
Exactly.
That actually was very that was prominent in the Japanese culture for
That's right.
a long
That's
time.
right. It's very prominent, and Native American culture here in the United States too.
Yep.
So those are just examples of metabolic differences, to your point, that are very pronounced. And that means there's probably a host of intricate or smaller differences behind that. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, hey, Tony, one thing I got to ask you before you go.
Sure.
You have a nickname. You have Tony Scarcrow Ricci. Where the hell does that come from?
Okay. And there's a reason why I keep Scarecrow. So here's what happened. So, I think sometimes people, so I grew up commercial fisherman, and so kind of like, the real manual labor guy, and my ears are a little beat up from years of training. But when I was in Macau, China, I was there with Chris Algieri when he was fighting Manny Pacquiao. So I was also there with Stitch Duran, and Stitch, great cup man, the greatest, and a really great, you got it, and a great human being. Stitch is, he's a good man. His family's beautiful. But anyway, so I don't really talk about my background. I live with me. Why would I talk about me? I'm bored by me.
You know you.
Yeah, exactly. I live with me all day. So anyway, so I told Stitch, Stitch, I train. This is what I do. I grew up a fisherman. And we were talking about like how our roots were comparable, And then what happened is there was a physician that I started talking to. And actually, who was with me and Stitch, or Stitch and I should say. And we started talking about some obscure metabolic pathway. And Stitch didn't know what was going on because he didn't know I had, a couple of doctorate degrees in biochem, nutritional biochem, not real biochem, but nutritional biochem. And also, I didn't have the sports psychology at the time. I just finished that. But anyway, my point is, Stitch didn't know what was going on, and he looked at me and goes, "Damn, man, you got a brain, don't you?" And I'm like, "Oh yeah, I didn't tell you, Stitch. I went to school." He goes, "Man, you're like the Scarecrow in the Wizard of Oz."
That's great. I love that story. That's
he only had a brain, and that's how I got my nickname. He started calling me Scarecrow, and when Stitch gives you a nickname, you keep it, right?
Well, hey, that's awesome, man. You can't get away from that one because that's
exactly. So
why would you lose that? Because I think and it has a great story behind it. I think
it does. It's a fun story. So
it's an awesome story. That's why I had to ask. I was like, I got to ask this question. I just have to, and it's definitely, It's funny because I asked a couple people recently because they have nicknames, and I asked them about their nicknames, and there's always, especially in the fight game,
a good story,
always a great story with it. So
particularly if it involves Serra-Longo, it's going to be a good story. I can tell you.
Yeah, there's definitely great stories there, man. But listen, I'm going to leave it right there because that's such a high note. I want to be respectful of your time. I appreciate it so much, you coming on. I hope you come on again and we could have another call because I got so many. I have about 1 billion questions I had written out, and I got to about 6 of them. So
okay, and I apologize because I tend to ramble.
No.
But hey, anytime. I really enjoyed this, and it's a really fun to be on with you, and I really enjoyed it. I'll come back anytime. This has been great.
Oh, thanks, man. I appreciate it. And I'll catch you. I'm hopefully going to, be around a little bit more up there. And
I hope so.
Yeah. So we'll see you soon, man. And thank you so much again, man.
Thanks, my friend. I'll see you hopefully this week.
I'm going to try. Yeah.
All right.
All right.
Take care. Bye.